to our latest ALTA Insights webinar. I'm Jeremy Yohe, ALTA's Vice President of Communications, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about good funds, seamless transfers, and this isn't really just about compliance requirements. It's really the key to building client trust and delivering a smooth closing experience. So again, thank you for taking an hour of your time today and learning about how to enhance your process and really protecting the funds and delivering what your customers should expect at closing. During today's presentation, our experts are going to touch on the latest standards for good funds. They're going to explore some best practices for secure and efficient transfers, and then share some practical tips for reducing delays and avoiding costly errors. Before starting, I've always got a few housekeeping items to go over. Our webinars are recorded. You'll get an email with a link to the recording tomorrow, and you can always access all of ALTA's webinar recordings at alta.org/webinars. And if anytime during the webinar you have a question, submit them in the questions box. We'll hold some time at the end for Q&A. Before introducing the speakers, I do need to thank Old Republic for sponsoring today's webinar, and we have a short little clip from Old Republic to share.
At Old Republic Title, we understand being a title agent isn't just a job. It's your opportunity to make an impact. Agents are at the heart of every successful transaction, giving peace of mind to your clients through some of life's most important decisions. We are here to help you work safer, smarter, close faster, and grow your business. When you are ready to take your business to the next level, Old Republic Title will be by your side every step of the way. Let's shape your future together.
All right. Thank you, Old Republic, for that message. All right, there we go. All right. Andy, I just made you the presenter, so you should be able to share your screen. I'll introduce the speakers here while he's getting that set up. First we have Andy White. Andy is founder and CEO of Closing Lock, which is a fraud prevention software platform used to securely share sensitive documents, wire instructions, and facilitate payments. Andy, I saw on your bio that when you're not apparently helping us with webinars, you also take your kids to Chick-fil-A. So I thought that was fun.
That's exactly right. That's one of the things I love about it is their service-oriented model. They're very focused on kind of customer experience, and yeah, I love taking my kids there. We always have a great time.
Yep. I actually thought it was kind of appropriate. Customer service, protecting funds, information that really comes with a lot of what we're talking about here today. In addition to Andy, we also have some wonderful people from Reliable Title based in Tennessee. I'm sorry, Reliable Title and Escrow. Cut off the full company name there. Join us. We have Melissa Neeson. She is Vice President of Operations. And also join us today is Nathan Watson. He is the title company's client coordinator. Melissa and Nathan, they're going to share how their company approaches the closing process, sending funds securely, and making sure the customers have stress-free closings. And with that, Andy, I will turn the presentation over to you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jeremy, and thanks, Melissa and Nathan, for joining me. It's I can sit up here and talk about what our customers hear on a regular basis, but I think it's always wonderful to have people that are actually doing the hard work here join me and share all their tips and tricks with everybody. So appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you.
So quick agenda on kind of what we're going to go over, some of the gaps that we see at traditional methods for moving money in real estate transactions. Then, of course, we'll talk about some best practices for covering some of those gaps, and then strategies to kind of meet modern consumers and buyers, what their expectations are and how to achieve those. And then lastly, we'll have some time for some questions kind of here at the end. So, when we think about kind of gaps and things that are going on today, as Jeremy mentioned at the front end, closings aren't just about compliance. They're about trust. When you buy a home, you sell a home, every buyer, seller, agent, lender, everybody on this transaction wants to make sure that they know where the money is going, that it'll be there on time, that it's the right amount. There aren't going to be any surprises. There aren't any delays. There aren't any complications with that. And when we think about it, I'll just kind of give a high level overview of how I've seen the real estate transaction over the years. We can break it down into two different parts, right? There's moving data. There's a lot of data that moves around on a real estate transaction. And then there's actually moving the money for that real estate deal. When we think about the data movement, as we all know, primary methods for communicating on a real estate transaction are email, phone, and fax, right? Those are basically the three methods we use. When we think about actually moving the money, obviously that's largely done with checks and wire transfers. Now, when we think about checks and wires, that's been the same process that it was in the early 1980s even. So we're talking about systems that are over 40 years old now that we're using for moving. It's actually $2 trillion. If you sum up all the money moved in residential real estate transactions every year in the US, it's over $2 trillion goes in an escrow account and out of an escrow account using these systems that are somewhat old, we'll say, older than me even, and I feel like I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So it's not surprising that using these outdated systems, just the complication with a real estate transaction, that there end up being a lot of gaps in how that money moves. And then those gaps create real risks for clients and obviously you guys on this call and making sure that money is protected and everything. So, there are kind of four big things we're going to talk about quickly here: fraud risk, human error, timing, banking availability. On the fraud risk and kind of human error side, when I think of gaps in traditional payment methods, I think of moving money for real estate transactions. The first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is wire fraud risk. I think that's probably, if we did a quick informal poll here, the first thing everybody would think of is like wire fraud, of course. I think Jeremy Alta has some good stats, and I don't remember the exact time frame, but real estate losses due to wire fraud have grown like 50 times in a very short period of years there. The FBI every year, they report hundreds of millions of dollars that are lost that gets reported to them. And often we hear these big numbers, 50x increase, hundreds of millions of dollars lost, and we think of it as like, kind of this abstract thing, great, 446 million lost last year, whatever. We kind of lose context on it. But then, as you all do, you see those articles in Apple News or wherever you get your news information from that talk about, the one I always think of is the single mom in Houston. She lost $40-something thousand to a fraudster, ended up homeless, had two little kids with her. I mean, just really tragic, awful stories that when this money goes awry, when there is a problem, it's not just one of these stats that the FBI reports. It's actually somebody's entire life that kind of gets upended from it. Melissa, I know y'all take that very seriously at Reliable Title, and you've kind of seen the pressure that can put on your teams and your clients. How do you think about this world?
For me, it is so incredibly important. So with wires in particular, we have to be proactive with how we handle our security. But the thing is we also have to think of how our clients may not be as proactive with their own security. So it's kind of like playing Ironman football, where we have to play both offense and defense. And what's also, I guess, a little bit interesting with it is it's not just like one or two transactions. It's not like a one-off. For us, it's actually every transaction we need to be thinking in this way.
Yeah, 100%. And I love the football analogy, like y'all being in Tennessee, me being in Texas, grew up in Alabama, Southeast, a lot of strong football ties there. So
It's
I love
time in Tennessee.
that. Who's the real UT? We'll have to get into that conversation later, right? The thing you hit on there that I really appreciate was the one or two transactions. It's not just one or two transactions. It's every single transaction. We talked about, when somebody loses money, it's their entire life that kind of gets upended.
It can be, yeah.
One of the things I've seen is specifically around, okay, so wire fraud is a risk, and we just talked about it and how that can upend somebody's life. And I've seen some of a tendency in our industry here to maybe kind of go backward a little bit. Specifically, I've seen some title companies that are mailing wiring instructions, to the buyer's address. I know y'all aren't doing that at Reliable, which I'm appreciative of. But there are others in our industry that are kind of going backward, trying to solve this problem, or pushing cashier's check. That's one that I've heard a lot of, because wire fraud has become so prevalent and we're so worried about wires going to a fraudster that we've said, okay, let's go back to what we did before wires were really used for everything. Let's start using cashier checks again. And the thing that kind of gives me pause and concern, and I think y'all, Melissa and Nathan, y'all have some stories to share on this, but real quick, I see stats all the time on like check fraud still accounts for like 30% of all fraud losses last year. I saw something recently that banks reported check fraud cases have like doubled since 2021. So as our world has become more digital and we're less dependent on checks, it's almost the opposite. Like check fraud is getting even worse for some reason. And a lot of it's kind of these same schemes that we've seen before: check washing, overpayment, return scams, counterfeiting, that kind of stuff. And Melissa, I know when we were preparing for this, y'all had some pretty good examples on what you've seen recently with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think they're getting more sophisticated, and I don't think the answer is going backwards at all. We had a situation not too long ago, probably like within the last 6 months, where a certified check was mailed into us for some earnest money, and I can't remember the exact figure. I want to say it was like 10,000 or 15,000, somewhere along those lines. It was not so much to raise any red flags, but in addition to that, the check looked completely legitimate. It had the little threads in the paper, it had the security strip, you hold it up to the light, it had the watermark, and it was drawn on a known bank. We deposited in with our normal daily deposits that day, and then electronically. And I think it was like the next day when I was reconciling the accounts, my deposits weren't adding up. And so I had to do like a deeper dive with our bank and saw that that part of the deposit was rejected. And I was like, well, what happened here? Well, it turns out that the signature line is actually made up of microprint, little characters. And when you looked at it, because we still had the original check in hand, when you look at it, you couldn't tell that. But the bank fortunately was able to spot that, and as a result rejected it. And then further on, we were like, okay, this appears to be some part of a fraud. And they reached out to us later and said, hey, it's fallen through and we'd like you to wire these funds back now. And so while we have had the experience with it, we fortunately have not been a victim to it. We have a lot of different safeguards in place that help us with that.
Yeah, and just what's interesting there, you know, we've got on the slide here, banking availability. It's really good that your bank in that case caught it so quickly, right? Like I think you said next day you're already checking that. I mean, imagine the bank doesn't process it that day, or, you know, often banks take 2 or 3 days to kind of look at these things. And then all of a sudden money's been wired out, and now all of a sudden it's overseas, and that money ain't ever coming back. And so it gets, you know, very concerning that, you know, we have to hope the bank is catching these things, because, you know, what are you supposed to do? Like get out a microscope and start checking through the cashier's check or whatever for the microprints? I mean, that's not realistic, or should be expected of your job.
If the title company doesn't reconcile often enough, you know, they recommend daily reconciliations. If you don't do that, then there's a good chance you're not going to catch that until it's too late as well. So
great example of, yeah, working daily reconciliations in there. I love it. Is that one of the Alta best practices? I know we're going to talk about that in a minute. It should be. Nathan, I know when we talked to you beforehand, you had an interesting story, kind of a cashier's check that was pretty large sum that y'all ran into as well.
Yeah, we had an out-of-country check that came in. It was an earnest money check for $150,000 on like a $2.5 million purchase, which is not uncommon. But the check, when we looked at it, you couldn't really tell anything was wrong with it at all. But we held on to it just because it was from out of the country, and it just kind of wasn't the norm for us here in this area and for our offices. So needless to say, within like 3 days, the contract, of course, canceled. They wanted their EMD funds refunded to them. It was for sale by owner, so we got a email to refund that money to their wiring instructions. But fortunately, we didn't deposit that check because it just was fishy. It didn't look right. It didn't seem right from the contract and everything else. So that we dodged that bullet.
yes.
That's thankfully you dodged the bullet, but that's also a good segue into the next little bullet point on here in terms of human error. You know, everything you just described as I was listening to you describe it was based on kind of human intelligence to realize there was something fishy going on. And that was, you know, based on training and intuition, obviously, all the kind of facts of the case there, you put it together and say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't actually seem right. So it's pretty cool to hear you talk about the human aspect of it as well, which gets into training. I talk a lot about, everybody in cybersecurity says humans are the weakest link. I hate that because I feel like it's a cop out for, oh, okay, well, we can't do anything, like, it's just people, so, nothing can be done about it. The reality is we need to be training ourselves, our teams. I know we spend a lot of time internally at Closing Lock on cybersecurity awareness, spoofing awareness, and making sure people are using multi-factor authentication, because we hire a lot of people. I'm sure at Reliable Title, y'all have had people come and go as well. I think we've doubled our team size this year. So we've actually added a lot of people in a very short period of time. And it's critical and imperative that we have all of those people educated on what we do internally to protect ourselves, because we're protecting y'all, who are then protecting your customers' money. But if any part of that human element there is not trained, or they don't realize what's going on, then it can be fairly easy to overlook those things. One of the other things we haven't really gotten to yet here on our slides, I guess the timing aspect of it. We can talk about protecting payments. We can talk about making sure people are trained on what's going on there. But the reality is, checks definitely don't always move at the speed that, we'd want to see from a closing. In fact, we just talked about some examples there of checks showing up the next day or a couple of days later. Wires can also be delayed. I'm sure y'all have some horror stories about that. But yeah, I'd love to hear kind of Melissa, Nathan, y'all's perspective on how you've seen timing impact transactions as well.
Well, so buyers don't always plan ahead. They don't plan like around the deadlines of when they need to send in their earnest money or have their cash to close. And I would love to tell you that we have final figures like well before we go into a closing. And if I did that, every single settlement agent on this call would know that I am not being truthful. We have lenders that will work with us and they'll send out like preliminary figures to their clients, and they'll say, well, this is what ballpark figure. But when they get to the table, they still might be short. And depending on whom they're banking with, sending a wire from their home bank may not be an option due to banking hours or when their cutoff times are or location and whatnot. So being able to work with a company where the funds can be sent securely and at the table has been a real godsend really for us. And in particular, well, I want to go back to the earnest money thing too. So with earnest monies, you typically have to have that into you within a certain amount of time from the purchase agreement being signed. And if it doesn't happen, then that could actually put them out of contract. And as a result, those people could potentially lose what they're wanting to purchase. So for that reason as well, being able to offer that as an option, I think is a great way for our clients to have that convenience of working with us, and also our agents as well.
100%.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't have a local branch anymore. Like 48% of people don't have a local branch the way that banking has generally went now. So it's a lot better to be able to send out things to invite them in to where they can actually send those funds over, like earnest money if they need to get it to us early, cash to close, things of that nature. It's just there's a lot of people who, like I said, that are coming in from out of state as well too, and don't realize, oh, I'm not going to have a local branch to where I can go pick up a cashier's check or I can go wire these funds.
Yeah.
So they're running into that issue. But then with Closing Lock, we don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, obviously I love that as the head of Closing Lock. I love hearing people talking about using Closing Lock, but it's always important to try and meet buyers where they're at. And I know we've got a slide in a minute where we'll talk about that, but when you think about home buyers, that I closed on a house on Monday, there's a lot that's going on. Like, we're trying to figure out how to move, when to move, what are we going to do with our existing home. In addition to, great, now I have to figure out how to get my money over. And all title companies now do a good job of this. They scare all of their home buyers into, you're going to lose your money to wire fraud, be very, very careful. But then it's kind of like, you're going to lose all your money to wire fraud. Here are the wiring instructions, make sure to call us. Best of luck to you still. So I love the idea of, can we go further? Can we do more to deliver kind of reasonable expectations to the home buyer of, hey, we are going to protect your money. Here's how we can do it. Here's an easy way to make this happen for you. Or, if they still want to do a wire, they can obviously do that. But I don't want to get too bogged down in what the gaps are, because I think we could probably talk all day about some of the concerns in the industry and you're all thinking, great, thanks for telling me about all the problems I already knew that existed here. What can we kind of do to move forward against some of these problems we just talked about? So there are a lot of gaps, like we said. The good news is, and Alta did not pay us to say this, we just, all three of us on this call happen to be big fans of the Alta best practices that do exist out there, particularly pillars 2, 3, and 4 that relate to these gaps in the payment methods that we're talking about. Melissa, I know we've talked a little bit today and then previously as well about how big of a fan you are of the Alta best practices, as am I. So yeah, I would love to hear kind of how you're going through some of those pillars today and how you're leading those teams into action.
Well, for me, having the best practices kind of does give us the framework of how we can build out our business. It's also very important to keep the steps simple so that every day we're keeping closing safe. I also like think in the bigger picture thing that if you didn't have something in place, what could happen? What could transpire with regards to your business? So for instance, the reputational harm, if you're not doing what you say you're going to do with regards to protecting clients, their information and their money. And then frankly, depending on your company size, one misdirected wire could have you shutting your doors. So for me, yes, it's about protecting our clients, but ultimately it's about doing our business better.
100% on the pillar 2. So let's dive into some of these pillars as well. I think that's the good funds one. Melissa, you'll know better than me on that. I know y'all deal with that in Tennessee. We have requirements in Texas. A lot of states have, state level kind of good funds laws. They're all different, but they're all fairly similar. And then like, hey, it needs to be a wire transfer, cashier check, or maybe a couple of other minor nuances there. But how do those? You're dealing with it on a daily basis there, Melissa. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
So Tennessee's good funds law, it does set the framework where we cannot disperse the funds until they're collected. Because of that, we do prefer to have wires because of the immediate availability. Working through the service that we work with, what's really great is that the timing of that can be very quick. We've talked about convenience already and whatnot, so I won't go over that again. But yes, once we get notification from Closing Lock that the funds have been initiated, we know already to look out for that wire. And then once it hits, we know we're good. And there's nothing worse than, I think, sitting at a closing table and you cannot disperse to anybody because you don't have those wires, the funds in. And so it just creates discomfort for all of your clients, and it's not a great look. So anything that we can do to make it more convenient by working proactively and ahead of time, that's what we're going to do. And once you explain it to our clients that this is why we need what we need, they seem to all understand, and so it's never an issue.
Yeah, that's great. And especially you were talking about sitting at the table waiting for funds to go out and you can't disperse yet. We talked at the front end of this conversation about trust being so important in this transaction, like your buyers, sellers. Everyone wants to trust that you know what you're doing and things are going well. And if the money's not there, there's nothing you can do about it because your best practices, and you're not allowed to actually send the money out without violating state statute there. So, you guys look bad. It's just kind of a tough situation. So when you think about, these Alta best practices help us try to avoid those tough situations as best as possible. How do you kind of think about best practices as it relates to reliable title?
Okay. So yeah, what works really well for us is trying to weave those best practices into our daily habits. So it's not just a checklist. It can be a checklist, but we don't want it to be. We want it to be just a normal part of your standard operating process. And then by looking at balancing the use of technology along with training of the people that work with us and then auditing that work that's going on, we keep the transaction safe for our clients and efficient for our team. What's really helpful, and I know I've said this already, and I was saying to Jeremy before we hopped on this call, I kind of feel like I get on an Alta best practice soapbox, but it's really helpful that they have on their website things that can help you sketch out your best practices. But in addition, we were just talking about the good funds. They have this really handy, it's like an Excel spreadsheet that gives you a comparison for all the different states of what would be required for your state with regards to good funds. So the resources are there, you just have to go and find them. And if you don't have best practices with your company, then you're really I just feel like you're shorting yourself. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, as we think about those best practices, and like you mentioned, Alta does a good job of keeping them up to date as well. And we can talk about the kind of identity verification stuff that just changed. Wire verifications, obviously wires are kind of the backbone of the real estate industry, which obviously makes verification of both the identity and the wire there kind of incredibly important to our day-to-day job here. Nathan, I know you guys have spent a lot of time at Reliable on trying to figure out how to be ahead of the curve when it comes to wire verification or identity verification requirements. You know, why has that become such an important safeguard other than what I just said?
Pretty much what you just said. It's just knowing who you're dealing with beforehand is like so beneficial. I mean, being able to verify an ID just to make sure that, I mean, it's pretty much a necessity now in our business with verifying people's IDs prior to even talking to them or even working with them, because you want to know who you're dealing with when you're accepting funds, when you're receiving funds, and it's just it's crucial to the business. I mean, it takes one wire, like Mel said, that can literally be the destruction of a company or just to torment the day. But it's really, really important to make sure that we can verify who you are prior to and during the process of dealing with that client.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to that end, kind of on the identity verification, like you said, being somewhat mandatory for what y'all do on a daily basis. I think Alta, Jeremy, you can correct us if we're wrong on this. Didn't Alta just say, hey, you've got to start doing identity verification now on your transactions?
Yes, that was just one of the recent update to the best practices. And we will actually be having a webinar in November that will focus on all the revisions. So stay tuned to that as well. Thank you for the plug.
I'm glad we could plug the one for 2 months from now. That's awesome.
Yes.
As we kind of move through the pillars here, pillar 3, I think, is the one that talks specifically, and I'm not the Alta best practices expert here. Melissa would qualify for that for us, but I think pillar 3 is talking about safeguarding privacy and information. The first thing that always comes to my mind when I think about data security, privacy, information is obviously multi-factor authentication. That's something I require everybody at Closing Lock. Melissa, I'm guessing everybody at Reliable MFA as well, or what are y'all's stances on that?
Yes, sir. It's the standard. It is not optional for us. There is not a software or piece of technology that we're using that does not have that built in. So for me and for our team, it's non-negotiable. It's just a normal part of our day. It's such a normal part of our day that it actually feels very invisible now. I know that whenever I go to sign in the morning, I have my phone because there's going to be an authenticator app I need to go to, or I'm getting a text pushed to me, or just something that I need to do in order to get that next level.
Oh, that's great. And I love that the invisibility fill to it. I had not thought of that. I use MFA for all of our systems as well. And you're exactly right. Now it's just kind of a part of life. It's not even like an extra thing. It's just how you log into systems now. So I love that. Yeah, I hadn't really put 2 and 2 together there. So that's awesome. Nathan,
I love the fact that it just puts that extra layer of security on top of security that we have.
100%. And that actually gets to a good point on kind of protecting clients' data and privacy as well. So it's extra security there. Obviously, I have an obligation to protect everything Closing Lock does. Y'all have an obligation to protect everything that Reliable Title does, but y'all also have a further obligation to kind of protect your clients' data and privacy. And so maybe Nathan, what are some of the things you guys have done on that end to try and protect your clients as well?
Well, having it to where we can have the advantage of all the clients to complete all the majority of their closing tasks, like at least the ones that are high risk and one secure network, has been great too. For the identity verification, document exchange, sending and receiving funds, and it makes it a lot easier to have it all in one spot.
No, that's a great point, because one of the fraud vectors I have seen many times is when a title company is using 3, 4+ different platforms for doing these things. We got one for DocuSign, we got one for identity verification, we got one for trying to send the payment or the wiring instructions. Even the transaction I did on Monday, I had a couple of different systems I was logging into to interact with that transaction. The more platforms that are being used there, the more fraud angles there are for somebody to come in and say, hey, client, you've got these 3 other systems that we're using with the title company. Here's your 4th one that actually has the right wiring instructions in it. They're just kind of more fraud vectors and ways for fraudsters to go after your clients, which I guess works perfectly into our next bullet point there on client education. I saw a stat recently, I think it said 60% of consumers reported that they thought they received adequate fraud education from their real estate professionals. Now, you know, that might be more of an indictment on realtors than it is on the title companies there, but it is a surprising small number there that feel like they were adequately informed about fraud when it came to their real estate transaction. The other stat I always think of when it comes to client education is about a third of home buyers are first-time home buyers. So they've never bought a home before. They don't know what to expect. And even if you have bought a home before, frankly, like, you know, I just bought my second one. The first one I bought was in 2016. So I'm now 9 years removed from that process. I don't remember anything that happened in that transaction. So basically every time you're dealing with buyers, sellers, even some realtors, you know, they might only do it 2 or 3 times a year. It can be somewhat of a new, complicated, confusing experience. So when we think about, you know, client education, there's obviously the numbers I just described there. Nathan, what have y'all seen? Because I know you're focused specifically on kind of the client side of the world for Reliable Title. What have you seen that's kind of worked well for y'all?
Well, teaching the realtors from the beginning has really worked well to let them know what to expect. We initiate every transaction to all of our clients with a welcome letter that lets them know what kind of technology we're going to be using and what the client can expect. The realtors kind of know this already in advance to make them aware to expect those emails and things like that, so that they'll know that they're going to be logging into a certain technology or a certain program that's going to be for their security. And then they kind of appreciate it because they realize that not only is it protecting their client, it's protecting them as well as us.
I've heard people before say, like, you know, hey, our realtors don't want to get on board for this. They don't want to do anything different. We don't want to upset our realtors. And I get it. Like, that's a huge source of business. We want to keep those repeat clients as best we can. But what's interesting is often when I hear that, I wonder how much of that is truth versus fiction. Because what you just described there, and I've heard this from others as well, is that realtors are usually pretty excited to, like, you know, if they're informed, if they have the tools, if they have the materials that they can share with home buyers and home sellers, they're usually pretty excited to be like, hey, here's how I'm protecting you from this real estate transaction. Sounds like you've kind of seen the same thing there.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, you take the monkey off of their back and it works so much better, like especially with the earnest money deposits and things like that. It's amazing because a lot of those real estate agents, they might not even be able to deal with escrow or earnest money or holds or anything like that for funds. They don't have the capability to do that. So SecurePay allows us to do that really easily.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah.
Depending on what's happening, like if it's seller impersonation fraud or something like that, they're also victims to it. So if you're listing a piece of property that's being represented by a fraudulent seller, you've already put money into marketing and whatnot. So this is just, it's going to affect you too. So
that, like, they actually have a stake in the game. Like they should care about it. I think some of it too was, you know, if we back up like 5 years ago, most real estate agents had not had any direct experience with a fraud attempt or anything. Actually, nobody actually ever lost money at an individual basis. Now, at an industry basis, title companies were losing money, home buyers were losing money, but there are 1.5 million real estate agents out there, whatever it is. On an individual basis, they likely didn't see it actually happen to them. But 5 years later now, even if it hasn't happened to them directly, it's happened to one of their friends or somebody else in the brokerage. And now they're kind of on board for, hey, we need to be doing something here to try and protect everybody from fraud.
Yep.
Absolutely.
That, Nathan, what you said actually was a pretty good segue into kind of meeting buyers. You were talking about the payment system, SecurePay. I appreciate you putting in a plug for Closing Lock there. But, you know, if we back up a few years ago again, there weren't a lot of kind of digital systems or technology offerings out there to improve some of these experiences or solve some of these problems we've been talking about. I know y'all started exploring digital payments, ultimately made the decision with us, which I'm grateful for, but this isn't a Closing Lock commercial. I'd love to just kind of hear more about what pushed your team to explore digital payments. Why were you looking at that? And, you know, have you seen any impact on kind of adoption? Do buyers like it? Is it, you know, what are you seeing from that perspective?
Definitely buyers. I mean, they expect convenience, and this is one of the best things that it offers too. I mean, Buyers can send money instantly through Venmo, PayPal. They can order their groceries and pay for them with their watch. So they expect that same type of convenience when they're ordering and paying for their home.
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, actually, when I think about kind of the founding story of Closing Lock, when I created it back in early 2017, the whole concept was I bought the house in 2016. I saw the process. I was like, man, this is ridiculous. I have to drive to Wells Fargo. I have to send off my entire life savings to this random account number I got in an email. Surely there's a better way to do this. That was actually kind of the impetus for doing everything that we've done since then. And I remember that was 9 years ago now, which seems crazy. Remember thinking like, why is it for everything else, even 9 years ago, I can pay for literally everything else online. I can do PayPal for stuff. I can do Amazon. I can buy groceries even online. Why can I do everything else online except, you know, the largest transaction I'll make in my life? No, no, no. Please go do this the old school archaic way. So Melissa, too, you know, I'd love to hear from you on this as y'all evaluated the different digital payment solutions that exist. You know, what was kind of your checklist, or what criteria were you running through saying, hey, this is, you know, what we're looking for out of this product?
Yeah. So when we started going down this rabbit hole, we looked and vetted at a number of different companies before settling on one. And I would love to tell you that compliance and security was like my top priority. But really, all the companies that I talked to, security and compliance was theirs as well. And they would always send their white paper so you could see just how secure they were and whatnot. So taking that off the table, what really became my first priority was ease. So ease for our team and ease for our clients. And then obviously the security and compliance builds into that as well. And I was looking for a solution where the security would be robust and continually evolving, because the problem is that scammers are constantly getting more and more sophisticated. So with that, we need to look for ways, and we want the companies that we're working with to be looking for ways to stay a step ahead of that. There's another, I love that, bear with me one second here. On the accounting side, I know I touched on this already and I'm repeating myself. I love that when those payments come in, I'm able to match them up without any issues. I'm able to reconcile those very easily. I love that the convenience of having the earnest money be able to come in this way. I love that we could take that off of our agents. So if our realtors are not wanting to act as escrow agents, they don't have to. There's a lot of agents that we work with now that are not in the office any longer. They don't have a brick and mortar. And so they put us down as the escrow holder for that earnest money. Being able to offer that to them is actually a marketing point for us. So I love that we can do that with them. And then the other thing is, you know, we talked about ease already for our team, but within that, I wanted to work with the system that I wanted us to work with a system where we didn't have to go continually fishing for information. We didn't have to go pull it, that it would kind of be pushed to us already. And there would be no lag time with that. So for me, I think when you can make it easier for your team to use, then they're going to use it more and not have an issue with using it. And the same can be said for our clients. We want to make it easier for them. We don't want to make anything more of a roadblock for them when it comes to closings. It can be a very stressful situation for them already. We want to take that off their plate.
I think that's fantastic. I love kind of the checklist there of ways that people on the call can think about evaluating digital payment solutions, particularly like you said at the front end of that, security and compliance. Those are somewhat just table stakes at this point. Like if the payment system you're not using is not secure, like it doesn't matter. You shouldn't use it. So yeah, I love that. And then thinking about how does it work from an accounting perspective? How convenient is it for our home buyers? You know, that can always be a big one as well. I know a lot of times home buyers will say, hey, can I just, you know, pay you with a credit card or something like that? No, we can't do that because of the good funds laws we just talked about. But can we provide a payment solution that is not just for earnest money, but also cash to close, down payments, et cetera, that they're sending? I think a lot of home buyers get kind of confused and tripped up on that. Realtors as well, like, wait, I can use this for sending the earnest money, but I can't use it for the cash to close. Why is that? So I think those are all great questions to kind of ask. And, you know, that gets to convenience being an important part. Like I said, you want to make sure it's good and easy for your buyers to use, so they'll actually adopt it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in my career where, great, we'll put some complicated process in place, and this happens title companies as well, like we'll add some complicated procedure for checking off wire transfers, verifying identities, or something like that. We'll do something very complicated, and then people just say, this is too hard, no thanks. Unless it's pretty easy to do, people aren't going to adopt it, even if it might be better for them, especially when we think about buyers, like, hey, pay through this digital payment system, it's more secure than you just wiring off your money wherever you want. But if it's not convenient for them, then you're going to see pretty low adoption on that. And so I think making sure you look at a tool that, you know, has good adoption, that buyers say, hey, you know what, I like this, it works well, it works for all my use cases, I don't have to have all these weird caveats to it, et cetera, can be very powerful there. All right, I think that was Nathan, Melissa, either of you want to kind of add anything there on evaluating payment systems, or are we ready for Q&A now?
Good.
All right, and real quick, I will just say kind of a quick wrap up as questions are probably coming in. We've gone through a good bit today, obviously fraud risk, timing challenges, best practices, which again, we think what Alta does is great on that side. Please go review those if you haven't. Make sure you're implementing them with your title companies, but also making sure that, you know, protecting money isn't just about the compliance side, it's not just about the best practices. It's also about trust, it's about convenience, it's about delivering a better experience to our home buyers that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the closing experience is what they're going to remember, you know.
Reputation.
That's how you get realtors to come back, right? If they have a good experience, if your buyer has a good experience, or if you offer a differentiated experience from the other title companies they close at, and the buyer's like, hey, this was pretty cool, I enjoyed how this experience went, that's how the realtor will come back in the future.
Exactly.
We have survey results that show that.
Yeah, I bet you'll have a lot of market research around that.
All right, we are on Q&A time, so if you have some questions for any of the panelists, please submit them in the questions box. Nathan, love the welcome email that you all send. Question, do you send it to the consumer, the home buyer, and when in the process do you actually send the email?
As soon as their file is open, they receive that through our secure closing portal, both buyers and sellers.
It's an automatic trigger on our end, so it's really invisible on our part, but the visibility on the client's part is big time. And we actually give links to websites that we work with as well, so they can go on there and read more about it. We do the same thing with our agents too. So our agents understand that we use it that way. Obviously, we have the conversation with the agent also, and we have the conversation with our buyers and sellers. But with every transaction, we want to inform them that this is what's going on. And we actually use some statistics that you all had shared earlier with regards to wire fraud to kind of give them a background of why we're doing what we're doing.
Two things, Jeremy, I've seen specifically on the wire fraud side is email signatures. I've seen a lot of companies put in their email signature, this is how we share wiring instructions, it won't come any other way. That can help, because if a fraudster sends them a different way, then the buyer's like, wait a minute, you told me you weren't going to send them another way. Another kind of effective tool I've seen is sending it at the beginning of the transaction. So Nathan, to your point there, the welcome email goes out right at the beginning. I don't know if this is best practice or not. I think it should be. I'll say it's the closing lock best practice, is if you can get the wiring instructions in the home buyer's hands immediately. So contract comes in, they immediately get the wiring instructions. Tell them these aren't going to change. Feel free to call us later in the transaction and confirm them if you want. That's what I did most recently on my transaction. I got them at the very beginning of the transaction, used those for earnest money. 30 days later, I called the title company again, even with the same account and routing number, because I'm paranoid and it's a lot of money, just to make sure that it was going to the right spot the second time as well. So tell them, hey, wiring instructions from the beginning, they're not going to change. Here they are, and go from there.
Exactly.
Yep.
So everyone kind of involved in the transaction is going to get this communication. That way the realtors know how they're going to receive their money as well, right?
Yep.
It's not just so much for that part, it's also so that the realtors are going to be the first point of contact for their clients. So when their clients are going to question something, yes, we will invite them to contact us, but more than likely they're going to reach out to that realtor first. We want our realtor to understand, hey, this is what we're sending to your clients, So this gives you a little bit of information with regards to it as well. We're going to ask for IDs and we're going to run it through a verification system. We're going to, if we need to send a wire, you know, this is how we're going to do it in order to verify that their account information is correct and whatnot. And so we just think that more communication is probably better communication when it comes to security.
Yep. The thing I love about that, the stat I've heard before, 75% of home buyers are couples. So for instance, a husband and a wife buying a home together, in fact, that's exactly what my transaction was on Monday. Both my email address, my phone number, and my wife's email address and my wife's phone number were put into the system. So we both got the notices. Here are your wiring instructions. We both verified our identities separately. We both filled out information sheets, all of that, because if you can get it to both of them, as you can imagine, my wife and I talk every night, and we were talking about the real estate transaction. If I had said, hey, somebody called me and sent me wiring instructions for the real estate transaction that we're doing, and Abby says, well, you know, I got mine through Closing Lock, that should raise a lot of red flags, and that can be another kind of point that we can push in there of send it to the buyer or send it to the husband and the wife on the transaction, just so everybody gets the right information.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, criminals have become more sophisticated in their spoofing of emails, and have definitely identified, you know, real estate industry as, you know, a target. So, you know, the question is, you know, how do you kind of control or, you know, guard against maybe a spoofed email? If they have breached the home buyer's email, or, you know, someone else involved in the transaction, how do you kind of safeguard against that?
We just had that happen not too long ago where we received an email from it was actually for a payoff though, I believe, and it had been spoofed through the people's email, and we received a payoff email or payoff statement that was not legitimate at all. So it's just verification and re-verification is the only thing that you can do really. And fortunately, we already had a lot of that verified, and we just called and said, hey, we received a different type of wiring instruction. We just wanted to verify this with you. And then they were like, no.
That actually was it was a title company, Nathan. It was, we had to send funds, the seller's funds, to another title company so that they could purchase. They were in another part of the state. And we had received their wire instructions securely, but then we had also received them through our normal email chain. So that was already a red flag. But what I also like, that actually just reminded me of the whole thing with Closing Lock, where we can actually have the other title company verify their wire instructions through their portal as well. So it's not just limited to our direct people in the transaction. We can use it with other parties to that transaction also. So that was a great question and a great reminder of how we use it.
That's great. And Jeremy, just to add on to that real quick, I'll give kind of three multis that I'll talk about. Multi-factor authentication, we talked about that throughout the webinar earlier. If you can get the buyers and sellers to also employ multi-factor authentication for when they're communicating with you. So in order for them to send you an updated bank statement or anything like that, they have to log into a system where they're verifying their email and their phone number or something like that. That can help crack down on kind of spoofed emails. And, you know, I'll talk about the other two multis here in just a second, but there's no silver bullet. I mean, all of cybersecurity, I say this all the time, there's not like just do one thing and then you're done. Like, you know, just implement this one best practice from Alta and you're done. Just sign up with Closing Lock and then you're done. No, that doesn't exist, unfortunately, in the cybersecurity world. It's always a layered approach, and that multi-factor authentication fits perfectly into that layered approach. Add another layer of authentication into the system if possible. Multi-party, I just talked about that in a minute ago. Send it to the husband and the wife. So if one of them is spoofed, if one of them is compromised, hopefully the other one is not. And then lastly, multi-channel, which kind of relates to those other two. You know, try to communicate through multiple channels. Obviously, definitely multi-factor is related directly to multi-channel. Can I get an email and a phone verification? Can I get an email and a text verification, et cetera? So those are my three multis for trying to fight against things like spoofed emails or compromised accounts.
And I think as a society, we've all just become accustomed to the MFA. You know, whatever website you're logging into, you know, it's going to send a text to your phone, and then you punch in the number. And at first it was like, oh, this is annoying, but now you really appreciate that additional layer of security.
Well, what's even crazy too is now, I think I don't have the exact stats, but something like 2/3 of home buyers will access our system from their mobile phone instead of from, a desktop or a laptop. And the majority of Americans have iPhones. I don't know the numbers on that, but high stats on how many of them have actual iPhones. When you log in from Safari, it automatically fills in the passcode for you that gets texted to you. So the multi-factor, you don't even have to type anything in. Like Safari just automatically fills in the two-factor authentication, which is one of the best Apple features ever.
Melissa, I really liked how you walked through the decision to select Closing Lock as your payment solution. How did you go about? Okay, once you made the selection, how did you go about getting your team, to embrace it and to use it, to understand, why you're getting this technology?
Yeah. So, well, the first thing that I was sold. So after I got a chance to demo it and see what was going on, I was sold, obviously. But what you want to do is it needs to be easy for everybody. So the people that are doing the day-to-day, obviously we want to make sure that it's done in a way, brought in a way that's very thoughtful and in a way that they can see adding it to part of their daily routine. Got with the managers of our branches and said, hey, this is what it looks like. Do you also see what I'm seeing here? It was a quick buy-in there. And then rolling out with our team, the service that we used, and this is not a plug for Closing Lock, they were great about onboarding. They were great about doing demos. Even today, if I have new employees come on, it's nothing for me to get with our rep and just say, hey, can you do another demo for us? Or it looks like you maybe have updated this part of your process. Can you show us a demo of that as well? Guess what? We'd also like to see it from our client's point of view. We want to be able to speak to that whenever they call into us. So obviously you want to find a company that's going to be agreeable as well, and they always have been. And going back on when updating their services, when they first started, I know that they had certain things that they offered, but since then, I want to say that you guys have added like 2 or 3 things to it. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong about that, but like with regards to the ID verification, I want to say that you added at least 2 or 3 things to what you guys are checking against.
Yep.
And that is very important to me. So
Yeah, you're exactly right, because fraud constantly evolves. So Closing Lock constantly evolves, as do our competitors too. This doesn't have to be a Closing Lock commercial.
Sure.
But that's an important reason. I talk a lot about, look, I don't know how to settle a real estate transaction. I would be lousy at that. If I need to close on a house, I'm going to use y'all to do it, which is exactly, what I do. But from a cybersecurity perspective, a moving money perspective, that is my expertise, and I do know how to do that. And so I hope others in the industry rely on us, and there are other vendors too. Like I said, I don't want to make it a Closing Lock commercial. But one thing, Melissa, you really highlighted on that I loved was the buy-in throughout the organization, because that is so incredibly important. I mean, we can talk ad nauseum about best practices, what we should be doing, what we should be requiring, and we're all talking about it from the leadership level. If the people that actually do this on a daily basis aren't bought into the technology, the best practice, the process, whatever it is not going to work. I can guarantee it. You're just wasting time trying to push it through. So you got to get buy-in from everybody in the organization, so we make sure we're protecting everybody's money.
exactly right.
All right, we've mentioned best practices a few times. In case you don't know what they are, or you haven't bookmarked the page on Alta's website, the link is in there. The best practices were recently updated to include ID verification, and then the best practices work group actually last week just published I guess I'd call it a white paper. It's on vetting the vendor. It kind of outlines the process on going through and the questions and things you should be considering when you're looking for any vendor. And actually, in the October edition of Title News, the main article walks through the process of shopping for tech vendors, and actually includes kind of like a checklist and a grading scale of give each vendor points and help you decide on your solution you may purchase. And then also I did put in the link to the Good Funds page on the Alta website, and it outlines the Good Funds laws in all the states, different various payment rails, and a really nice comparison chart of the different fund transfer systems that are out there. So
What's
definitely,
kind of funny to me about the best practices stuff is not only do all the Alta companies use it and go through it and make sure they're following them, the vendors do too. I can speak directly for us. I know other vendors in the space do as well. We look at those best practices and say, hey, how are we helping here? What are we doing here to solve this problem? Are we compliant with the vendor vetting process that Alta is recommending? And I think it's also important because we have people on staff here that help contribute to the Alta best practices. I know other vendors do. I know a lot of underwriters do. I know a lot of title companies do. I don't know if everyone's familiar, but the way those are created is Alta gets together all these experts in the industry and says, hey, give us your collective wisdom and knowledge, and like, let's put together this framework that we can share with everybody. It's a pretty cool process.
yeah, it's, well, reliable title and, people on the webinar, competitors, but, you're all on the boat together. We all need to, keep these transactions as efficient, safe, and smooth as possible, because that's the gold standard. That's what the industry has delivered. That's what we always want to deliver, and that's how we'll be viewed. So, hats off to everyone who takes compliance and this very seriously. Nathan, I had a quick question for you. You mentioned you guys do surveys. So kind of like, what do you ask your customers? And maybe if you want to share with some of the results, did you all get the 5-star rating?
We're what at, Mel, 4.9?
I want to say last month we were like 4.93 across with all of our branches together. Yeah. So we get a lot of good feedback, and Nathan, I'm answering this for you. Please forgive me for that.
Technology is the only thing that I have as a survey that people have said that they just love our technology that we use, and that's why they come back to us.
And really, the technology should be invisible to them. So when you actually get a comment that something works out well, then you're kind of like, oh, good, that's great.
Would you say that, are your home buyers, younger, older? I'm just trying to help. Is, are there younger home buyers who are embracing the tech, or is it everyone? I think I may be the oldest person here on this call, but I love technology, and I want it to be seamless. Nathan, you mentioned be able to send funds to friends through Venmo. It's such an easy, I think it's secure. And as you all have said, that's what people expect. And then they buy a home, they're like, oh, why can't I do the same? So I guess to get back to the question, Nathan, is it kind of across the board ages, or do you see one demographic over another?
Yeah, it's completely across the board. I literally I walked a gentleman, and he didn't really understand the concept of what it was. He was 89 years old, didn't understand exactly what the concept of it was, but he needed to send his earnest money, and he was living in, I think, Wisconsin or somewhere like that out in the Midwest. So he had to have it turned in today. So we walked him through it. He was like, well, this was a lot easier than what I thought it was. I was like, well, you really done it yourself. I said, I just had to be there to kind of be a little bit of a backup. But yeah, we get a broad range of everyone, from people that don't barely know how to turn a computer on to where people that are doing it from their watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick, I don't want to interrupt, but the sentiment, I remember 10 or 20 years ago, it was often like, oh, well, our grandparents, they don't know how to use technology, and there's this older generation that won't adopt technology and they won't do this. I feel like that's largely gone away. Maybe it's because I'm older now, and so as I get closer to that, I feel like that's less of an issue. But I don't hear a lot of complaints of like, I don't have a smartphone, or I don't have a cell phone. I used to hear that one a lot. Like, well, what if they don't have a cell phone? Kind of everybody does now. I mean, Nathan, to your point, even the 89-year-old guy that you were talking to, he probably had a cell phone, and he was able to. The generation of like doesn't use technology at all has kind of passed, unfortunately, but the old generation now, they're mostly familiar with these kind of standard systems.
Absolutely. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour. This was a great conversation, a lot of information on how you guys are sending the funds, that are giving people confidence that the money is secure and it's going to who needs to get it. Just a reminder, if you missed parts of today's webinar, or if you think others in your office would benefit from listening, you'll get a recording of the webinar tomorrow. And all of our webinars are archived at alta.org/webinars. I do need to thank Old Republic once again for sponsoring today's webinar. And that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. Nathan, Melissa, Andy, thank you for sharing your expertise on this, and take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.